должен знать, что он имеет против себя решительного врага. Отныне наша задача будет состоять в том, чтобы истребить всех немцев до единого.
The manufacturing process was designed to accommodate for people with little qualifications to be part of the manufacturing process. That's how they got the speed of production.
Если немцы хотят истребить войну, они ее получат.
G'day champions! Today we're going to be doing the T-34-85, arguably the tank that won World War II. You want to speak Australian, join an Australian tank. This is a Russian tank, we speak Russian, but I don't speak Russian, so...
Who put the fucking nickel in you, Top? You talk crowd. You talk German.
By what country we in?
Germany.
Germany. They speak German.
So the sponsor of today's channel is Battlefield Vegas, right here out of Las Vegas, Nevada, good old USA. And Battlefield has still one of the largest collection of live fire tanks and artillery in the country. And if you want to visit battlefieldvegas.com, you can go online and they actually have an outdoor facility where you can shoot a tank, you can shoot a flamethrower, drive an APC, and come and see a lot of this Russian armor in action. So Battlefield Vegas, we thank them for letting us film their tank today. All right, before we dive into the tank, I would first like to point out that this T-34 here, as you see it, was restored by the guys at Panzerfabrik. Randy and his team are experts in their field, and the work that they did on this tank is phenomenal. And this tank is special to us because not only is it one of the most complete T-34s I've ever seen, it's also, with the exception of some of the rare ones like the early T-34-76s, etc., this is a wartime production build T-34 here in the United States. And this tank is special because, as we're going to dive into evidence that we believe, we think that this tank was actually part of the Berlin operation. So most T-34s that you see nowadays in private hands are the later production T-34-85s. However, the majority of them are post-war productions. A lot of the Eastern Bloc countries after World War II manufactured T-34. Off the top of my head, we definitely have like Czech Republic, countries like that. A lot of the T-34s are from those places. This one here is a World War II Russian T-34. And there's a lot of giveaways on here, but there's parts and components on this tank that make this T-34 very rare in the collectible world today, and this would be one of the more valuable T-34s out there. It also has a live 85mm gun, which we have fired. But one of the sort of, I guess, archaeological indicators of why this T-34 is special is mostly the turret. So going back to the production of this T-34, it was made in factory 112 in Gorky, which is just outside Moscow. It has a 1944 build date, but this tank was actually knocked out. And the reason that we know that is not only did Randy and his team find a 88mm hole size on the left-hand side of the tank, this type of turret is what they would call a replacement turret. So there's indicators on this turret that suggests this type of turret was not built to be installed on T-34s as they went through the production line. This was kind of a crude replacement turret that was made for refit of T-34s, and this tank has that. So being knocked out by the 88mm likely killed the crew. We haven't been able to find records of that detail, but we do know it has the replacement turret. But the replacement turret was also manufactured in that factory 112 in Gorky. So factory 112 produced the least amount of T-34s of all three factories that were making them during World War II. Another one indicator of World War II is the solid type road wheels. These road wheels are specific to this sort of time frame and factory production of World War II. Nowadays, a lot of the T-34s, they have the holes in the road wheels, and it's essentially to save weight. This is some of the rarer type of road wheels that you see out there. They're also in excellent condition. There's very little rubber missing off the wheels, so another great piece for this tank. Another reason that this tank is special is because we have configured this tank for the Berlin operation. A lot of the T-34s you see out there today are very sort of generic. And the Berlin operation was very unique in that it had what you see up here, these added protection measures, which we're going to talk about shortly. But the significance of the Berlin operation and why this tank is special is what we do know about this tank is that this tank was covered with post-war East Germany modifications, things like a crew heater, extra lights, different positions for pioneer tools, etc. And the tank came from East Germany and ultimately made its way into, back in the 80s, 90s, what was called the Del Smith collection here in America. And Del Smith sold off parts of his collection to what was then the Evergreen Air and Space Museum in Portland, or outside Portland, Oregon. That museum is most famous for, that is the location of Howard Hughes' Hercules, the Spruce Goose. That museum used to have tanks all around the outside of it, and this tank was there for a long time. I even have pictures when I was much younger, when I traveled to America, on this tank, climbing on this tank. Back then it was nothing but plain green, and I had no idea that I'd be working on it sometime later, so it's a funny world we live in. But going back to that East Germany situation, what happens right after World War II, like day dot almost, when the wall went up and East Germany and West Germany was separated, the East German military, when they had to raise up, they went through and essentially did a cleanup of Berlin, and any vehicles, military equipment they found in the Berlin area immediately was pressed into service into the East German army. So given that this tank is a wartime production build, it has the damage with the replacement turret, and then it was in the East German army right inside Berlin. We're now narrowing that window down to the likelihood of this tank being into the Berlin operation as very, very likely, although we're still chasing evidence to get solid proof on that. So a little bit about, I should say, for the Berlin operation, the T-34 was not the only tank that was to participate in that. There was many other Russian Red Army vehicles as well, such as the IS-2 Stalin tank and so on. But T-34-85 played a big role in that operation as well. Why the sort of the add-on armor was unique to the Berlin operation, a lot more prevalent there than a lot of the other battles from the Red Army in World War II, was the Germans had come up with their Panzerfaust, shape charge warheads, kind of like a early type of RPG, if you will. The Russians referred to that as the Faustpatron, and they kind of got wind of this new technology that came out, and this cage armor in Berlin is probably likely one of the earliest attempts at utilizing cage armor. And the idea was, if you could get that shape charge warhead to detonate just a few inches or a few feet away from the hull or the turret armor itself, that detonation point, the travel period by the time it actually reaches the hull, it will lose over half its penetration velocity. So it's a very cheap, effective survival measure in terms of the cages and whatnot on the top. Now, this was tested in theory back in Russia throughout intelligence reports and battlefield post-after-action reports that this weapon was now available. The Russians tested cage armor in like a testing facility, and it worked in theory. However, that they did discover it didn't always work, but given once again, it was a cheap and easy way to increase your survival chance. There's pictures from tanks all throughout Berlin. They had bed springs, they had pieces of fence, gate, whatever they could find was welded to the turret. Even they added other components, sandbags, wood, whatever they could find as a way of trying to protect against this new shape charge weapon. And that's very unique to the Berlin operation. Now, these add-on German armor pieces here, this is very unique. Now, we narrowed this right down. So Randy did his restoration, and this tank came to Battlefield Vegas. The only thing that we did at Battlefield was modify it further to be unique to the Berlin operation. So we just added the cage and the side armor. The side armor was drawn off a picture that we saw of a Red Army tank crew, but they were all from Kazakhstan. And they, perhaps in one of the earlier battles outside Berlin, they took out a Stug or perhaps a Panzer IV, and they took the hang-on armor, which the Germans called Schützen, like skirt armor. They took it off the wrecked tank and they hung it on their own T-34, and then as they were against the Germans, they scratched out all the German markings on there, and they utilized that Schützen armor for their Russian vehicles. So Schützen armor, then going on to sloped hull armor, very effective. So that was kind of a representation of a T-34 setup you really don't see very often at all. So one of the most common myths out there about T-34 is that the design was very successful and very effective right out of the gate at the early part of the war. That is not true at all. The concept was there. That was the important part. The key part is the concept was there for what the T-34 was supposed to be. But the Russians learned the hard way in blood with essentially trying to work the bugs out of that concept. And it wasn't just the tank itself. It was the factory. It was the training. It was the logistical background of what you see here. And it took the Russians quite some time to get the wheels in motion, to get the concept into reality that was actually effective for the Russians on the battlefield. By comparison with the Germans, though, is no one doubts the Germans had very capable, effective tanks. However, the Russians took the concept, in terms of strictly engineering speaking, the Russians took the concept of T-34 and they continued to improve on it, all areas of it, its manufacturing process, its training of the people building the tank, its training of the crews, and the features of the tank. They kept improving that concept, whereas Germany kept trying to change the concept of the tank. And every time they changed the concept, what came out the other end was an improvement, yes, but it cost them time, it cost them money, and ultimately, you might say, was one of the leading factors into their loss in the war. The Germans definitely noticed the effectiveness of the T-34, because you have to remember, they had just steamrolled Poland and France. In record time, they had training, radio communications, and their mechanized army of that time was second to none in the world. It wasn't till they hit the Russian T-34 crews early in the war on the Russian front. That was Germany's first sort of wake-up call to where they had to reevaluate their strategy with armored and mechanized warfare. So the T-34 definitely had that success. But from the Russian side of things, whilst the concept was there, a lot of work and improvements had to be made to the T-34, but not just the tank itself, the entire process and background in which they would manufacture the tank as well.